Mamas, we are glad to have you here today. Today I am joined by someone who happens to live in my hometown and that makes her Canadian. She is a mental health advocate. She is a mama just like you. She happens to break dance for fun on the side, even though she says for fun on the side. I know it was also a career for her for many years to teach dance. And she is an overall amazing mama. Connie, Jakab, I'm glad to have you here today.
Oh, so happy to be here.
Sounds good. So tell us a little bit about your relationship with parenting. Like, how old are your kids? What's your situation? Just tell us a little bit about you.
So I have a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old. And, right now there is a lot of peace in our house, but I love what you said pre-interview. I mean, that's the story right now, but that could change tomorrow.
Isn't that the truth? I often say that. I'm like, you know what? I love having teenagers today. So far, all the days have been like that, but you just never know.
Yeah.
Good. So tell us about, I know you're a really, really big fan of kids and mental health. And what are you passionate about in your story there?
Well, my background is actually working with youth at risk. I started my resilience career about 20 years ago on the streets of East Vancouver, working with drug dealers and gang members, and actually started a hip hop studio for them to teach mental health and resilience through dance. And, it was funny being so new to mental health and 20 years ago where it was compared to where it is now with the awareness and what's going on. Oftentimes we would find ourselves saying those families.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting, we moved here about 14 years ago to Calgary, and I continued my work in schools. And I found it very interesting that I would work in affluent schools, middle-class schools, and schools from very low-income areas. And the anxiety and depression that I saw in all three were exactly the same, but for different reasons. Mm-hmm. And it started creating questions in my head, like, I wonder what's going on here. And then our family hit a mental health crisis. Our oldest son at 6 years old was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. At 8 years old, he became suicidal. And this is my house, so all of my stigma, all of my ideas of what I thought mental health was and who it impacts was completely being shattered. Mental health is absolutely no respecters of persons. You can be educated. You can even have mental health awareness. You can have book smarts. You can be married. You can be divorced. You can be low income, high income, and it doesn't matter. And that is what really blew my brain and really dove me into this area of what does it look like to actually help our kids? But I had to go through it first. And it was quite the journey, I have to say.
And so what, I want to go to that, like going through it part. What did it feel like going through it with your 8-year-old and having, like, what kind of help did you get him? What was it like for you as a family? Tell me about that.
Well, it was actually really scary. I mean, because a lot of times when you've gotten the help, there has been years up to that point of just crisis. And at least in our house, it was crisis. Depression for my son showed up as rage. It didn't show up as sadness. And I find often with boys it does, because it's these big emotions, and there would be thrashing, and there would be wrecking our home. There would be threatening us with knives, threatening himself with knives. It was very scary. Mm-hmm. And so by the time we got to the hospital, that's where we brought him. Like, we were at our wits' end. I mean, our marriage is at that point on a thread. I am literally living in trauma all the time. And I remember the psychologist asking me, so what do you do when your son throws these fits of rage? And I said, well, I send him to his room, tell him you can't come out until you're going to be a good boy. And she said, oh, no, you never send the hurting away from you. You bring them closer. And I'm embarrassed to say I had no idea what she was talking about. I mean, here I am with all these book smarts on mental health, and I have no clue what bringing someone hurting closer looked like. In fact, I didn't even see him as hurting. I saw him as rebellious. I saw him as a need. We need to fix his behavior. Send him to the hospital, put him on some meds, bring him home with some counseling, and like, let's move on with our lives. And, he was there for 3 weeks, and he did come home with medication and counseling. And I'm like, yes, life is going to be different. And then, that first fit of rage hit again. And I remember feeling so desperate, like, are you kidding me? Like, counseling doesn't work, meds don't work. And actually they do. But I didn't realize that the person who was going to have to change the most in my home was going to be me. Mm. What I did was I remembered her words. I remembered bring him closer. So I thought that meant give him a hug. Now, I don't know if anybody's tried to give a dysregulated child or teenager a hug, or if anyone's tried to hug you when you're losing your mind. Like, it just isn't a good idea. So I learned that very quickly. It doesn't mean giving a hug. So I just removed all the sharp objects and I just sat with him in the same room. And I would just say, son, we love you. You belong in our home. Nothing is going to break our connection with you. And I'm saying this to him as he is thrashing, as he is swearing at me, telling me how horrible I am and calling me all kinds of names. And I remember having to show up like that, not even for a week, not even for a month, for a year. I showed up like that for a year. But that year, while I'm sitting with him in his dysregulation, I mean, my own trauma is smack dab right in my face. My own issues are rising to the surface. I didn't realize growing up how we did not know how to handle emotions in my house. I mean, emotions were not okay. Anger, we don't feel that. Sadness, put that away. Even overly excited, that is just like tone it down. And so I didn't have a very healthy view of emotions. I was always trying to change his behavior, fix his emotion. I never knew how to just sit with him in it. And so that's what I learned that year. I had to be so brave to face my own trauma and to learn my own emotional regulation so that I could manage my own anxiety and therefore, eventually be able to manage his. And I'll tell you, the person who changed the most in the house was me. And then change started to happen.
Mm-hmm. And so you said you would like sit in the room with him for a year because that was bring him closer because you didn't know what else was bring him closer. And it's funny because when you said bring him closer, I had that same like, oh, try to hug them, right? And yet it's probably like hugging a spiky octopus. It's not a great idea. And so what else did you do besides sit in the room with him? And what did bring him closer mean?
Well, like I said, the first person I had to focus on was me. I had to find a good relationship with my emotions. I needed to start taking my own emotions and bring them out of chaos. So when we don't name an emotion or understand our own emotions, so let's leave our children out of it for now. Change the mom, change the kid. So my emotions were everywhere. But as soon as I named them, I brought them out of chaos and now I could hold them. I could control them. I was angry. I had so much anger inside of me. It was no wonder this poor child was angry. Yeah. I mean, my husband and I, my goodness, some of the things that I would say to him out of anger, yelling. And I mean, I didn't see it until that moment. And so I had to get a good, healthy view that anger and rage and anxiety, these were actually emotions that were alarms to tell me something's wrong on the inside. And I needed to allow myself to go into those crevices and journal, bring them up, face them. And it takes a long time. It took a year because trauma isn't just like, boom, it's done. But I really had to figure out, how am I going to make sense of my story so I can rewrite a new story for my kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's often that I grew up in a world where there were like good and bad emotions, right? So it was okay to feel the good ones and it was forbidden to feel the bad ones. And I think most of us probably grew up in some version of that. And one frame that I changed a long time ago was that they're all just emotions. Like there aren't good and bad ones. You know, if you feel anxiety, it's a thing. If you feel anger, it's a thing. If you feel happiness, it's a thing. They're just emotions. And so to give them voice and to give them names, like you said, and give them a space to be heard and seen and felt, it diffuses it and it like takes any charge out of it.
Yeah. And then we can do that for our own kids.
Yeah.
But we can't do that for them if we haven't done it for ourselves first. And I noticed my quick resort to fear, punishment, and shame. Those were basically my parenting go-tos. But as soon as I started to understand, like, anger's not wrong, anxiety itself, we're trying to cure our children of anxiety when sometimes that's just a really good gift and a sign, not that we stay there, but I was able to not use fear tactics, punishment tactics, control tactics. I was able to just go, oh, I see what's going on. Up here, there's a behavior, there's anxious behavior, there's rage, but underneath, what's going on? And it was my job to discover what was going on underneath, but I couldn't do it without going there first with myself.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So the theme of this conference, is embracing our imperfections, confessions of an imperfect mother. So I'm curious, where's one place you feel like you've really screwed up at parenting, and then you find out later that it actually has turned out okay?
Oh, well, imperfect right here. Honestly, I think my anger has always been a problem. Funny story, cute. Maybe it's not funny. Maybe someone will find this offensive, but there you go. I remember, being so angry with my son. And I had said things nicely about 9 times, right? Like that's saint status, friends. But by the 10th time, I'm losing it. Finally, I just said, Ben, damn it. And he goes, Mom, my name is not Ben, damn it. And I just burst out laughing. But I think about my anger and I think, oh, like no wonder he suffered. He was in the hospital. It's all my fault. And yet at the same time, my best friend once said to me, welcome to humanity. Mm. And I think that we have to understand that some of us grew up in families that were 10 times worse. And here we are, right, Andrea? We're here. Yeah. We made it. It is in our human nature to be resilient. And I think, one of my biggest sayings, I actually wrote a book called Bring Them Closer. And one of the last chapters is resilience is in the repair. It's not about having to be perfect. It's about learning how to repair when I've messed up.
Yes. And I think I've had this conversation with a couple other people on this conference even, and it's that in the repair, I don't remember my parents repairing with me when we were younger. Like, I think we grew up in a time where parents were very much like, I am the mom because I said so, that's how it's going to be. Or I'm the dad and I said so. And so I don't remember a lot of like examples of repair. And I don't even remember examples of repair of my parents between each other. I have another little obsession, which is I study people who I think have great relationships. And I ask them, like, what are you doing that's working? And one of them said to me, it's really important that you fight in front of your kids and you make up in front of them. If you're going to fight, make sure you make up in front of them. And I think that repair, we don't often see or aren't taught it. Like, it's not they should send us home with a book when our kids are babies. Like, the 52 ways you'll screw up and how to repair them. but we don't have that repair. How does repair look for you and your kids?
Well, it certainly looks like mom eating humble pie most of the time. Honestly, it usually means calming down, either allowing them to calm down if I've upset them or me calming down. And then just, it's not always about saying sorry. Sometimes like we're not wrong. Like we were in the right, but we burned a bridge in the process. And so sometimes it's sitting down when everyone's calm and just saying, hey, that was rough. Could we talk about this?
Yeah.
Or, just trying to invade their space a little bit. Like, can I come in? Can I come into your room? Because repair now with a 14-year-old is definitely different than when he was 8.
Very true.
Ask for permission.
They like their privacy. They have a big, big need for privacy. It's important. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. What's one thing you'd like mamas to know if they're struggling with mental health and their kids? And what do you wish you could say to anyone who's struggling with that?
Honestly, we look at mental health sometimes like I guess this is just the way it has to be. But to be honest, it doesn't. We get to determine the story that we write for our family. Now, my son's not, hospitalized anymore. He's not 8. We're not in crisis. But, his mental health is like this. But, we continually rewrite the story. Things could be so much worse. And I think I get tired of people saying, well, I guess my kids just have depression, or I guess they'll just be suicidal for the rest of their lives. Doesn't have to be that way. But we do have to lean in and we have to be brave. And so I created a little mantra that I say to myself, and it's, I am brave. I can show up when it's hard, love without walls, forgive when it hurts, and rise through the storm.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Final question for you. What's one thing you learned from your own mom?
I definitely learned to do everything in excellence. My mom is a perfectionist and I'm not. I have ADHD. I'm just like, that was good enough. That was good enough. But, she's excellent at everything she does and she puts a lot of care. And so I definitely learned that from her. When I do decide to hunker down and focus on something that I think is very important, I will put my excellent best in it because of her.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story and your wisdom. I definitely took away the bring them closer is going to become part of how I see the world as well, because sometimes it's easy to push them away. And so many other great nuggets. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Rich Christensen, and through the years of entrepreneurship and growing crazy businesses, I lost a view of what was really important. Through a series of really tender experiences, my mentor taught me you can replace anything in this world, but you cannot replace your family. So I made a dramatic pivot and started embedding deeply in my family some of the same principles that applied to business. My wife and I began very deliberately parenting. We looked for models, how not to mess our children up. There were really no good models to teach values, to entrench family unity, and to make sure that the values passed on in legacy to my children, and more importantly, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So like every great entrepreneur, I secretly created my own models. I was very hesitant to talk about it, but a few of my closest friends saw the impact that this was having on my children. I decided to take the processes that I used and create an online course so others could also work with their families to create tighter bonds, build confidence and self-esteem, while constructing a gorgeous legacy that they could live on past our lifetime. With this 5-part digital training series, you'll find the single most important lessons of thought leadership that I've ever created. There's 5 critical parts to this series, each with its very unique function. The first is symbols, creating unifying symbols that we all can touch to. Second is the doctrine, the guiding principles that we can tag and understand what the rules are. The third is the traditions or the rituals, where we actually formalize and we unite and show that we're unified with the values. The fourth, my favorite, the defining life events. The final section of this is the structure. What do the really wealthy families do to preserve their wealth and to pass on in the form of family banking? To pass on how you appropriately set up the will and how you embed your family constitution so that these values permeate and pass on. I can tell you firsthand that taking these steps to create a beautiful life for my family is the most important work that I've ever done and also the most rewarding. I would invite you to learn some of these principles, unify your family, bond them, and take some of the guesswork out of this. And I'm going to provide you the framework to make that happen with this 30 years of life experiences. So join me, get your membership to build family legacies today.